ornaments. They used them on certain war bonnets. Medicine men had the horns. They used the horns for any number of things, for decoration, decorating war bonnets, anything of that sort. Now the hide was used in many ways. The hide tan with the hair on it made their winter blankets. Now a blanket is something you pull around you this way. Now the ordinary blanket is a cloth blanket, which I'll show you in a moment. It's a blanket. It's a robe, but it's a blanket. But the buffalo robe, you make the sign for the buffalo first. You say, it's a robe buffalo, a buffalo robe. They also took those big, heavy winter coats of the buffalo and put them on the ground and made their bed. A bed, you see, that had what we call a lazy board on each end of it. And they could sit up there in the daytime with their back against this lazy board and with little shield drums sing their songs all day long with the fire in the teepee when it was inclement weather. So they made their beds, and they turned the robe over with the furry side toward them, and they slept between those robes in the wintertime. Now they could tan those robes also, take the hair off them, and that's what made the teepee. Now, out of the back of the buffalo, they would take the sinew that runs down the backbone and strip it, and it was just as thin as any of our thread, but it was much tougher. And they would take that sinew, and the way they described that sinew, they would say, the buffalo, out of his back, you take this that you're going to sew with. Sew would be like holding any sort of an object in your hand, like a moccasin, and then go through the motions of sewing. And that, of course, was your sinew out of the back. You've got the food, you've used the horns, you've used the hoofs, you've used his hide. There wasn't a thing of the buffalo. They would even take the tail and use it for fly swatters, keep the flies off you. They would use it also in ceremonies, in your buffalo dances and things of that sort. They would sometimes take the whole head of the buffalo and take out the inside, take out the skin, the hide off it, sew it up, and put it on and make a mask. And then your buffalo dance, they wear that whole buffalo head, very much the same as we wear a false face today. So there wasn't anything of the buffalo that was ever wasted. And that's why I say, greatest package deal that was ever given to any people. You might say the lives of the Plains Indians centered around their teepees. Teepee was home, was habitation. Then they had the large teepees for council purposes. And of course, if you had a great gathering of Indians for some ceremony, their teepees then would be pitched in a circle. But there's a great difference between the white man and the Indian's line of thinking. That's why when I mentioned some time ago that in order to learn signs or to talk signs or to know anything about the Indian, you had to know something about his psychology, something about his mental makeup. Now, everything about a white man is geometrical. His house is square, his streets are lined out in lines, straight lines, whereas with the Indian it's quite the reverse. Everything is in circles. He's taken the pattern probably from the sun. And the sun, of course, you crook the index finger and the thumb together, making a circle, hold it up toward the sky, and that's the sign for the sun. Now, the sun is his father. The earth is his mother. The sun gives him warmth, shines down on him. A lot of his mysticism is wrapped up around the sun, whereas the earth, like a good mother, nursing her young, gives him sustenance. The grass on the prairie for his horses, the place for the crops to grow up if he grows any. And as I say, that is the mother. He gets his sustenance from her. Now the teepees, as I say, they're made in a circle, they're pitched in a circle, and life within that circle is very important. And there are certain rules and laws of etiquette, just as we have them, that the Indian adheres to strictly. Because you see, you're pretty confined in a teepee, and therefore there are no noise, There's no noise from the children. They're kept quiet. Everyone talked slowly. And there was no question of violating their etiquette. Now, when the Indians sat down in the teepee, they sat in a circle. Everything was around the fire. Now, fire, as you see, is this way. And the fire was in the center, again the circle. To make a circle, you use the index fingers and the thumb, draw them into a circle, and the center of that circle is wherever you put your index finger down. That's the center of anything. So the center of the life in the teepee was the fire. Now, in their etiquette, in the teepee, there's one thing. If an Indian talks about his relatives, for instance, he speaks of his father. Then you have, this is the sign for the parent, the breast. That's the sign for a man. If it's that way, that's his father. That's a parent who is a man. Now, if it's mother, it's the parent who is a woman. Now, this woman sign, there are a number of reasons for that coming about. Certain authorities, well, they give their own particular version, but the way I've always figured it out is this, that the Indians, the different tribes, wear their hair differently. Now, you take the Blackfoot, the Crow, the Shoshone, the Bannock, a number of those northwestern tribes have two parts in their hair, one on either side. They wear them the two long braids. Then they roach the hair into a pompadour in the center. Now, your Arapaho, your Cheyenne, your Sioux, they're generally parted in the middle, at least on one side perhaps, or in the middle, and just wear it in the two long braids. Now, the women, I think years ago, when the men wore the hair in the braids, the women wore their hair loose, and I think that is where that sign came from, down this way, with the hair, indicating the hair worn over the shoulder loosely. Now, even though these Indians wore their hairdress in different ways, there was one particular way, there was one particular custom that they all followed, and that was that they all braided their scalp lock, which is right at the crown of the head, in a single braid behind. It was just as though there was a sort of a taunt, a challenge for anybody to come and lift it. Now here is a real Indian scalp. Now it's all decorated. Inside this is just the great piece of rawhide from the crown of the head, and this fellow has decorated this all with beadwork and dressed it up very nicely. But that is a true scalp lock, and that's about all they needed to take as a trophy. Half the time this might be braided, and then they would unbraid it to wear, and very often they'd sew these on their shirts. Many scalps, you know. As far as the relationship is concerned, I say there's father, there's mother. Now your brother is made this way, with the two fingers drawn from the lips, indicating that you nursed together. Now that is your brother. Now if it happens to be your sister, you'd make the brother sign and then add the sign for a woman, which is a brother that's a woman, and that's your sister. The strange custom that they have, of course, well, there are a lot of customs that are strange to the white man. You have your relatives by marriage, for instance. Many signs are made for that. Well, of course, you have your uncles and your aunts. If you want to speak of your uncle, he'd be your father's brother. And if it is an aunt, it might be your father's sister, the woman. So indicating your relationship that way. And a relative by marriage, they have 2 or 3 ways of doing that, but the one I like the best and the easiest one is like that. It means cut him off. He's a relative by marriage. And I remember one time we were down at Fort Sill. I was with General Hugh L. Scott. And some of these old Indians would try to stump us on some of these signs. They'd say, how do you make the sign for so-and-so? How? Question, you see. How do you make the sign for that fellow? So they asked General Scott, what's the sign for the little prairie owl? Well, the sign for an owl is a bird, big eyes, ears. So Scott made this sign. And he said, no. No. He said, I'm talking about that little fellow. that he lives in the same hole with the prairie dog. Now, you know, the prairie dog and the little prairie owl and the rattlesnake will sometimes all live in the same hole. And that's what he was talking about, the little prairie owl. So Scott said, I don't know, how do you make it? How do you, not to work or to make? It's like, well, it's almost like a plow turning over the furrows, you know. That's to make something. So he said, how do you make it? Well, the sign for prairie dog, that's his hole. Now, some would say he comes up, looks around, goes down. But the other version is that whenever the prairie dog goes into his hole, he dives head first. So the last thing you see is his tail wagging. So there's his hole, and you see that tail wagging, and down he goes. That's your prairie dog. This is a sign for your brother, and that's a relative by marriage. So when you put those three signs together, you get this: a prairie dog's brother-in-law. Well, that stumped both of us, so we had quite a laugh about that one. Now you get into your other relatives. Now, for instance, where do you take a mother-in-law? Now, an Indian is not allowed to speak to his mother-in-law. This may date way back for different reasons. Some have given it that the young Indians, when they were first married, were rather shy, were a little bit timid about meeting their mother-in-law. Others have given the version that perhaps their father-in-law had taken 2 or 3 squaws, and the last one might be pretty young. So if this young fellow could get at all familiar with what was his mother-in-law, there's a chance they might get cozy someday, you know. So in order to eliminate that, here was the sign they used, because of the mother-in-law came along through the village and met her son-in-law. She covered up her face, threw a blanket over her, and passed by. So the sign for the mother-in-law is the blanket drawn over your face. So that eliminates anything of that sort, you see. Now, as I mentioned a moment ago, when the Indian speaks of his wife, now to be married, I showed that sign of parallel. People are together. Or anything that moves along the same plane is parallel. It's the same. It means it's the same thing. Now, when you put those fingers together that way, that means that you are married. Or he might say, it's my wife, it's the woman to whom I'm married. Or a simpler way than that is the woman who sits down beside me, because an Indian is not permitted to sit beside his sister. Now, his sister may be his first cousin, and that too dates way back into antiquity, because they kept their bloodlines straight. There's no possibility of incest or anything of that sort. So he's not allowed to sit down beside his sister. Well, to point something up for you, it is rather amusing. When I first came to Hollywood, I didn't come in as an actor. I came down to bring all these Indians down to make a picture called The Covered Wagon. And after we'd finished the picture, I brought 50 of them down to Grauman's Theater to put on a prologue. We had them on the stage, and one day the manager of the theater came to me and said that they would like to take the Indians out to some particular exhibition or something that was going on where they'd get a lot of publicity. Well, I said, fine, you take the Indians and they'll go get somebody to go with them. I don't want to bother with that. Well, he said the assistant stage manager will take them out there. So I said, fine. So they had out a big charabanc arranged for them. In those days you had the big white sightseeing buses, you know, terrific things. And they'd seat 5 or 6 people abreast to go around, show them all the homes of all the picture stars and things of that sort. And they were sort of tiered up. Big high seats in the back, and they came down at an angle. So I thought, well, they'd all get in this big charabanc and away they'll go. Well, I went up to my dressing room, changed, got into my street clothes. When I came down, lo and behold, here, all the Indians all lined up in front of Grauman's Theater. Well, I came out, I said, I thought these fellows had gone on this tour out to this place you wanted to exhibit them. And then here's this fellow running up and down, tearing his hair, screaming at the Indians, and the Indians are just standing there, wrapped in their blankets, paying no attention to him. I said, I thought you'd gone. He said, I can't get them to get on the bus. They won't get in. What am I going to do? Why won't they get in? And I looked the situation over for a minute, and I said, well, let's see what we can do. So I said, Linda, you get in over there. Julia, you sit in beside him. Yellow Horse, you get in there. Briggs and Water, you get in. Whatever their names were, I picked them all up, and I said, now, in a minute and a half, I had the bus all loaded. He said, why in the world wouldn't they get in for me? Well, I said, I think it's probably because you don't know the relationship of these Indians. I happen to know their families, know their background, know who's related to who, and it may be a surprise to you to know that no Indian can sit down beside his sister. I can put a man next to his wife, I can put somebody between them, and then I can put his sister, but I can't sit them down there. So I said, before you start fussing around with Indians, you better learn something about them. That was a situation that he'd never encountered, and a lot of people have never encountered anything like that unless they get in touch with the old-time Indians. Today, it doesn't make much difference. But those were the old taboos that the Indians had. And life in the teepee, there's so many things that revolve, as I say, around the life in the teepee besides your relatives. Your food, for instance. They talk about you've got the fire and to cook. You put meat over the fire and cook it. And you eat it. And if you have a feast, you bring people in from all over. Now, to arrive at this place, you arrive this way, one person. But if it's a number of people, you lift the left hand with the palm of it up, take the right hand with the palm down, and people are gathered in from all over. And then they sit in a circle and eat. And that's a feast. You say, people are coming from here and there, and we're eating. Everybody's heart, now you see the heart is here. An Indian doesn't think with his mind. All of his signs are that he thinks from the heart. And if he wants to say, I think, he doesn't say, I think. It's from the heart. With his index finger this way, I think that is so. I think, or my heart thinks. And if he's nervous, disturbed, then he takes this question sign, which is yes, no, but with the finger sort of pointed downward, he rotates it and disturbed. I'm sort of all disturbed, nervous. I don't understand. And then if he's particularly sad about something, just to be sad would be the tears streaming down your face. But if he's terribly sad, or if he's homesick or something like that, then his heart is on the ground. Puts his heart right on the ground, and that's true sorrow. Now those little things that people, little nuances that people are not quite familiar with. If a man is sick, it's like the throbbing of pain, and then it's very sick. If he's got a headache, it might be that way. Or if he's sick to his stomach, or if he's very sick, they'll say he has sickness. And out of sickness, he might die. Now, if he dies, you hold the hand up in front of you this way and take the index finger of his right hand and bring it down and pass it under the left hand like that. He's dying. Now, sometime the man might be pretty sick, but he doesn't die. So he's down, he almost goes under, and then he comes up, and he lives. Now, to kill is something different. You kill by striking with both hands like that. Now, you can use that sign in a number of ways, to kill an animal or to kill something of the sort. But, for instance, if a man's hungry, starved to death, for instance, here's the sign for hunger. The knife cutting you across the stomach. And the knife cuts you across there, and it kills in your own direction. Not killing out there, but you are killed through hunger, which means that you starve to death. Now, as they sit around the fire and talk about things, and normally the old men will sit there and they'll smoke. They'll smoke with pipes. Now, I've got a couple of pipes here. Here's this type of pipe that might be used in the teepee by a group of old Indians sitting around. They're chatting, visiting, and they will load up the pipe. And to make the sign for that, if you didn't have a pipe in your hand, you'd make the sign for the pipe like this, then say, loaded up, and smoked. And then, of course, they would pass it to the next man. They would give it. I think I showed you the sign to give. You give like that. And if they give you something, it's like this. See? It's there and here. And so he takes the pipe, lights it, smokes it, and gives it to the man next to him, and he smokes it, and that is the way it goes around the circle. But as I say, it's always in that particular circle. Now, you take this big ceremonial pipe. Here is a real old Blackfoot ceremonial pipe. You see how long it is, how the stem is ornamented? Now, when they smoke that pipe, it's a little different than just smoking in the teepee. When this is smoked in council, the pipe is lighted, and it is first reversed and held up for their father, the son, to smoke first. Then they will tip it down so their mother might smoke it. Then they go to the four directions. They've done north, east, south, and the west, so that the four winds have also smoked the pipe, and they've appeased them all, and they've given a prayer to the four winds, to their father and their mother, and have shown them the courtesy that should be shown them before they ever start their ceremonies. Now, there is the idea of the ceremony of the pipe. Now, those teepees, I don't know whether I mentioned this to you or not, but the one thing about those teepees is that the doorway always faces the east. And no matter how many teepees you put up, they will all have their doorways east, because when an Indian steps out of his doorway in the morning, he has to greet his father, the sun. It would be impudent and bad manners and bad medicine if he didn't first step out and face his father. And that's why, as I say, the teepees always face the east. And no matter, I've had it happen very often, where a film director said, well, I want these teepees all in a circle and have all the doorways pointing in to the middle of that circle where our show is going to take place. Well, I've sort of grinned to myself, and I say, yeah, all right, you want to tell the Indians that? Is that what you want me to tell them? Yes, so I tell them. Pitch their teepees in a circle, and they would, and every doorway would be pointing. That isn't the way I want them. I want them in a circle, and the doors coming into the center of that circle. Well, I said, you'll never get an Indian to pitch his teepee. You can tell him as much as you want, but when that teepee goes up, that doorway is going to be facing east. You know, that picture that you were just looking at is a picture of my old friend Chief Goes in the Lodge. He's an Arapaho. As a matter of fact, he's my brother. Now, brothers, as I've explained to you before, is that you're nursed together. But we are just that close. This old fellow was quite a warrior, you know. He was born in a buffalo teepee, and he was a scout years ago. Now, that's the sign for the scout, like the wolf, for General Crook in his campaigns against the Sioux and Cheyenne, and a great character. And pounding that drum, singing his songs, seeing his picture takes me back a long, long ways. As the Indian said, now time, long time ago, it's drawn out like you draw out a bow, you see. Long time ago, when I see that picture, I think about him, and my heart is good. You know, it takes me back, as I say, to the sound of the drum. You know, when I first came into this moving picture business a number of years ago, I didn't come in as an actor. I'd been associated, of course, with those Indians up in the West. I'd been stationed up there at Fort Washakie. I'd been adjutant general of Wyoming, and I used to visit among those Indians and had a certain control over them, and let's say they had a certain, well, warm feeling for me, so that they would do what I wanted them to. Well, when they got ready to make a big picture called The Covered Wagon, it was made by Paramount. This is way back now in 1922.